Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here at Arts at Large. My name is Madeline Martin. I'm an artist educator. And joining me behind the scenes is Karen Cazares, who's awesome for being here this morning, and Diana Hernandez. She's the arts tech. So for today's project, we will be exploring these folk art style portraits. We'll be using inspiration from around your home and your environment. So folk art just basically means that it's art of the people, by the people. Typically it means that you did not receive or that artists did not receive formal training, which is part of the reason why I love it. It's just sort of an expression of our creativity that's inherent in all of us as people. So today will be low stakes. We're just going to talk about sort of some of the general rules that we can follow on creating portraits, and we'll create these borders that have design elements found in your home. For materials, some of you might have the Arts at Large bags already, and within those, and if you don't have the bags, you'll still need watercolor paints, and you can use these watercolored paint tins that you can find at most stores. Liquid watercolors work, watercolors from a tube also work. Watercolor paper. The thicker the better. You can choose to possibly tape your paper down to a surface, like maybe a piece of cardboard if you'd like, so it doesn't warp. It's really up to you. You may want to protect the surface of your table, whatever you're working on, just so you don't get paint on your table. You will need some water in a container from your home. Brushes. I like to have a few varieties of sizes, large, medium, and small. Small for detail. We'll need detailed brushes today, most likely. Paper towels in case you need to blot up any excess paint or water. And a lot of watercolor paints come with the lid that allows for mixing of colors, but if you don't have those types of watercolors today, I always like to have just a container for my recycling in which I can mix colors if I like to. Okay, so let's get started. I usually like to warm up my arms and my hands a little before I start drawing, just because I get shaky lines sometimes if I don't warm up my arms and hands. This is an example of a warm-up sheet that I just made. You can just play a little bit with some of the colors, especially if it's a new watercolor paint set that you're using. It's nice to kind of just like wake up that stagnant color, let it move around your paper, just get a feel for what your media is going to feel like today. So maybe you dip your brush on the color of your choice. You may want to add a little water then to your brush along with the color so that it glides more easily across the paper. You can start to get a feel for what watercolors, and some of you are probably familiar with watercolors already, but just play a little bit. Maybe you drop a color onto some of that wet paint already and just see how it moves around. Just wake it up, say hello to your paint this morning. And if you like, you can also warm up with a pencil. We'll be starting with a pencil. Oh, I forgot to mention those materials. We also need pencils and permanent markers. I apologize, I didn't mention that at the beginning. So maybe with your pencil, you will just make some spiral shapes. I find that's really useful to sort of like use my whole arm and not just my hand, because a lot of times drawing really requires that we move our whole arm and don't just rest our hand in one place, but we're really sort of like feeling the movement as we create. So maybe make some spirals. Maybe you want to make a straight line across your paper, because we will be making some straight lines when we create our borders. Maybe up and downs, zigzags. So it's really just your moment to warm up. And then maybe you also just want to warm up with the other material we'll be using, which is a Sharpie. I have some dry paint here on my paper. We will be using the Sharpie and the watercolor paints. So maybe just see what they look like next to one another. Again, maybe make a longer line, just some zigzags, some doodles. All right, so you can set that aside if you're done warming up. Now, look around your home. Here in this beautiful Arts at Large building, I was noticing that there are these pop-up plants that have heart shapes. There are architectural inlays that have this sort of like target circle. It's a really beautiful design element. When I looked up, I saw heating vents that have this radiating square pattern. But also from my own home, I brought along this tray. And you might be able to just see right here this pattern that is on the tray that I actually borrowed for another portrait that I created. So here on this border, you can see how we'll be taking some of those design elements. Let me hold it up so you can see. And we can apply them to our borders. So that's one thing I bought from home. This old vintage frame that I love has this sort of like scalloped edge, and that's where I got the border that now has red paint around it. And then if you look close, it has this sort of like barber pole design element, and that's on the interior of this portrait's border. And then a mirror that comes from my daughter's room has these floral design motifs. And in this portrait, I brought a few different portraits in different stages of evolution, but so it has that borrowed floral motif from this mirror. And then again, you could just look around your house. Maybe you have a flower pot, maybe you have some towels, tablecloth, wallpaper, a shirt that has some design elements that you like. This is an old tea tin that I thought could have a lot of potential in terms of borrowing some of those designs. And not even this easel that the portrait's resting on. Really, once we look around, there are so many design choices. So just take a moment, look around your house, see if anything calls to you or inspires you. And we'll begin by taking our pencil, and hopefully your arm is warmed up a little bit right now because we do want to stay loose. We'll be creating a border that is roughly, I would say, 1.5 to 2 inches, depending on how much you want to put inside of your border. It's really up to you. You're the artist. I typically don't use rulers when I create straight lines. I just like more of that organic feel where it's perfectly imperfect. But if you're more of a ruler person, feel free to use a ruler or possibly the straight edge of another piece of paper that you can follow along with. So we'll just draw 4 lines. And you have an eraser, I hope. Those of you with the Arts at Large kits should have just this eraser tip. And you can erase as much as you need, but I wouldn't get too hung up on the pencil part because we will be going over our pencil lines with a Sharpie. Yeah, just real simple. Create a rectangle inside of the border of your page. I am going to look at, for my design element, I really liked the architectural circles that are on all the door frames, Arts at Large. So sometimes if I want to create a design that feels symmetrical, I'll start by like each corner. So I put circles in each corner. And again, your design element is probably different. But I like to work from the outside in. So I usually start at the edges and then work inward so that it doesn't become asymmetrical if symmetry is something I'm trying to achieve. Okay, so this is your time to just explore recreating a design element in your home or something that has meaning to you. It doesn't necessarily have to be taken from your home. If you're looking around and you're feeling stumped, no worries. You can bring in spirals, zigzags, just whatever is coming from your imagination. So I would just maybe take a little bit more time to finish up that design on your border. Sometimes an initial line that I create was a little more hesitant, and I might go over that line to make it a little bit more confident. Let's see. So I've got these circles. Maybe I'm going to pull from something else in here too. So I really love the light in this building. So I'm going to add these sort of like pothos leaves to connect my circles. So just get creative. You can put different design elements next to one another. Yeah. So this is one possibility out of millions. If you are ready to move on, we'll now focus on the interior of that rectangle. If you're with somebody, you might want to look at that person. It's a really interesting and wonderful experience to actually draw someone who's in front of you, especially if that person, is someone you love and spend most of your time with. This piece right here is a portrait of my 4-year-old son. He'd moved a lot, so I understand the challenge of creating a portrait. And we're not really going for extremely realistic drawing. We're just sort of trying to capture a feeling, which is why I'll encourage all of you to possibly use colors that represent more than just what you're actually seeing. So maybe, for example, I want to show you in this painting. When I actually got to painting him, I put in a little extra like purple and red because I just felt like that represents his sweetness. He's just very cuddly and concerned with others. So sometimes color can be more indicative of a person's personality rather than just their outward skin color. So just to begin, let's kind of without even setting our pencil down, we're going to just like move our arm in this circular pattern in a circular fashion. I like to just sort of like get my hand moving before I actually bring the pencil to paper so that it feels really smooth. I'm just gonna now put my pencil down. I have this oval. So I'm gonna make that a little darker so you guys can see. Usually I draw pretty lightly because pencil lines often will get erased later. So in the center, the very center of your oval is where we are going to put our eyes. Now, typically, and every eye is different, every person is different, their proportions are different, so we're just making generalizations here. But typically, eyes are sort of shaped like almonds or footballs, and usually there is the space of one eye in between our eyes, typically. Again, we're all different. And I want to invite you here to look at a person that you are with right now. If that feels comfortable for you, you don't have to. You can sort of create a person out of your imagination as well. It's really up to you and your comfort level. So we've got these almond shapes. Now, before we even get to details of the eyes, let's move up to eyebrows. Usually the eyebrows start, if you have these like imaginary lines, these are just sort of indication lines. You're not actually going to be using those later, probably. But usually eyebrows start just right above the inner corner of our eye. Eyebrows typically follow the shape of our eyes, that curve. Usually eyebrows are thicker towards the inner part of our eyes and thin out towards the outer edges. So we're just putting up eyebrows. Again, you can look at the person who's in front of you. Now we'll move down to the nose. The nose will go about halfway down from here. Noses usually have these sort of crescent shapes to indicate the outer parts of our nostrils. Sometimes you can see people's nostrils based on your angle, sometimes you can't. But then again, there's usually this sort of crescent that is holding the nostrils together. Typically we have this little line right between between the nose and the mouth, and that indicates where the middle of our lips will be. And so lips usually have another crescent that echoes the shape of the nose's tip. And then lips may sort of flare out to the edges. Usually lips that are not smiling do not extend much further than the outside crescent of our nose. And then you can just draw that bottom lip. Again, look at the person you're with if you'd like to sort of bring in more of their features, but you don't have to. Sometimes lips have a little bit of another crescent there in the middle. All right. Now I like to sort of even out the face a little bit. My chin is, I'm going to hold this up so you can see it right side up. My chin, if you're looking at it proportionally, feels a little too small for me. So I'm going to go in now and I'm going to make that chin a little bit bigger. And depending on the age of the person you are drawing, they may have different cheek width, chin size. So, like for example, in my 4-year-old, he has much heavier cheeks than in this portrait that I started of my 13-year-old. So you can see the heavy cheeks, those baby cheeks versus sort of more of a grown-up face. And I think we're okay. I think we're all good. Okay, and now ears. I kind of evened out my face a little bit. I added a little bit of a heavier chin, added some more cheeks. Ears, we don't usually see a lot of ears unless someone has more prominent ears when you're looking at them head on. And if they have lots of hair, you might not see their ears either. So you may not even need ears, but I like to put them down as placeholders, and they usually fall, if you're looking at someone head on, they usually fall in between the bottom of the eyes and the bottom of the nose. So from here to here, they're going to be right in that region. Usually then our necks, again, depending on the person, they may have a wider neck or a thinner neck depending on the person. In young children, again, we don't often see their necks in portraits either. Their shoulders are much closer to their faces. But usually necks are sort of like if you're going to just follow like the generic proportions, they're going to sort of like fall below the outer corners of the eyes. And then shoulders typically just sort of cascade out to the edges like so. And now we can add hair if you like. There's such variety and such beauty and diversity in humans. So if you're creating a person from your imagination, just have fun. When you're looking at someone head on though, you will probably need to extend the hairline a little bit past where we drew the top of our head, just because hair tends to make us a little taller, especially when we're looking at someone from different angles. We might see more of the top of their head. So my person's just gonna have a little bob, I think, shorter hair. Adding a part is always nice. And now comes the best part, in my opinion, and that's putting in the irises and the pupils, because that really brings in the life to a portrait. Depending on the person again, their eyes may have a little crease on top of it. When you look at someone straight on, and depending on the person again, you may notice that they have a little crease above their eye. And you can add that if you want. When you look at someone straight on, you will see their iris. And that's going to be a circle, right? But it's usually cut off. It's not a full circle. If you drew a full circle without the top sort of cut off just a little bit by the top of the eye, that person would probably look very surprised. So usually we don't see the whole iris unless that person is surprised. Now feel free to add a light source in your eye. And that will be just usually white. It's a reflective surface that just adds to that glassiness of an eye that feels really real, like that person is with you in the portrait. And then add your iris. And then sometimes the iris is just cut off a little bit. You don't see the whole circle because the light source is there. And not everybody has eyelashes that are super visible when you're looking at them straight on. But like my 4-year-old son has super long eyelashes, so I added eyelashes to him because I just feel like that was so much a part of his personality and the way he looks. But some people don't have eyelashes, and sometimes it looks a little cartoonish if you add too many eyelashes, so use your discretion. And then if you would like, you can add a collar of some sort. And when you feel satisfied with your proportions, with where you put everything, with your design elements, you can now go in and cover your pencil lines with your permanent marker. And again, try to use your whole arm. A lot of times that frees us up to create lines that are much more fluid. So while we are filling in our piece with the permanent marker, I just want to thank all of you for joining us today and for committing to lifelong learning. And no matter your ability level as an artist, it's a really amazing thing to create something that did not exist before. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining on this exploration with me. And you'll go over every pencil line that you would like to keep in your final piece. The reason why we're using these Sharpies is because it creates such a nice, deeply segmented line for you to use your watercolor paint later. It's almost like painting in a coloring book later, but one that you created, which in my opinion is much more rewarding when you created the image. And I'm going relatively quickly here, just for the sake of time. But please go back later if you need to fill things in with more careful detail. And here's your opportunity as well to maybe you want to erase some of those pencil lines that you made before we bring in the paint. sometimes you can erase pencil lines that are underneath watercolor paint, but sometimes you can't. It really depends on how saturated the paint is on the paper. So some of the more prominent, darker pencil lines I like to erase. One of my favorite children's book illustrators, Jerry Pinkney, usually keeps his pencil lines in his watercolor paintings. And I actually really like that. I like to see the process. And I love drawings as well. So it's up to you what you want to remove or keep. So you can actually probably see the difference. I was looking at my daughter when I created this one, and then I was just sort of creating a person when I made this one on the right. You know, it's really a stylistic preference, but I think it is a little bit more obvious that I was looking at a person when I made my daughter's portrait. So let's begin painting. I'm going to actually pull up this like halfway finished piece that I started earlier, just so you can see the way watercolor lends itself to layers. I just put on, you know, flat layers on the edges of this border. I put down a flat layer of brown paints for my son's hair. And watercolor is very spontaneous. It flows really nicely, and actually it tends to create these things called blossoms, or it can bleed as well into a space where maybe you do not intend for a color to go. And that's really okay. It can be a happy accident, and a lot of people actually love that about watercolors, how it sort of has this flexible, unexpected nature to it. My son has never really been one to color inside the line, so I actually kind of liked how this turned out. I thought that represented his personality a little bit. But I did want to show you how once you have a layer that is dry, you can go back in and you can add more layers, and it creates more richness. So these were the design elements that I took from that tray I showed you earlier. I am going to do a little bit of blending, so I want to show you that. You can take a relatively thick, opaque amount of paint. I'm going to just swish my brush in the water a little bit. I'm going to pick up some more of that purple. I'm going to blend them together into more of this royal purple. I do love some colors straight from the tin, but sometimes I like to switch it up so it doesn't feel quite so straight out of the box. But now you can probably see that I'm achieving a level of saturation and brightness that you may not be able to get with just one layer of watercolor paint. And again, as you are painting, you'll just notice the nature of watercolor. You can add water to thin it out. If you really want dark colors right away, and I've seen many students over the years actually create really beautiful pieces where they use relatively little water, but I tend to prefer personally the feeling of more water under my brush because I like to add layers, and it's just really fun, in my opinion, to move this water around the paper. And feel free to also leave some areas white if you like. You can go back later. Do be careful not to put two wet colors next to one another if you don't want them to blend. So I'm right now using this blue paint next to the brown paint because the brown is dry. So I would suggest that you probably start on the border, on the exterior, and work your way in. Just kind of like how we did the drawing. We started from the outside and we worked our way in. And now if you want to experiment, think about the person that you have looked at or sort of modeled your piece after, and maybe what kind of color is like close to their personality. Maybe you can play with that a little bit. And now I just dip my brush in the red, and I'm going to just drop a little bit of paint, red paint, in the middle of my blue paint. So this is called a technique called wet on wet. And I'm gonna let that sit and just see what it does. Sometimes it's fun to let watercolor be watercolor. And now I'm gonna actually intentionally blend these two colors together. This is another like wet on wet technique where I'm just sort of I put red next to blue, and then in the middle, as you move that, it looks purple because red and blue make purple, as we know. So experiment with that. Just have fun. I feel like watercolor can be so rewarding if you just give it space to be itself. And try not to go in with really precise expectations because watercolor is so fluid. And again, if you are looking to achieve some color that's more rich and deeply saturated, wait till the first layer dries and you can go over it again. And you can even put down complementary colors. For example, if you wanted to create brown, to create a really rich brown, you can put orange down first and then go over it with purple later because those colors are complementary on the color wheel. Okay, so on my dried version, my son, I just had put down like this wash of a pinkish color, but we all know that black is beautiful, brown is beautiful, all skin colors are beautiful, and you don't even have to use a person's realistic skin color if you don't want. If I had to give my son a color based on his personality, it would probably be blue because he's very analytical and sort of logical. So maybe I'll make his face blue and see what he thinks about it when I get home. So again, it's expressionistic. You can really, oh, it's like an avatar. That's totally him. I wasn't even planning that. So, you know, it can be really expressionistic, which means that it is more based in how something feels rather than how it looks in reality. So again, I'm just, you know, dipping my brush onto the paint. I am putting, I prefer a little bit more water on my brush as I move the color around. There was a little bit of green left on my brush before. For some reason, I kind of liked that. A little bit of the blue and green create this nice, like, bluish turquoise color. And this, so we all put our Sharpies, our permanent marker down, and I hope that it's blending well for all of you as a great line, a great contour line to follow as you move color around your piece. Okay, so I'm just going to put the finishing touches on this avatar skin for my son. Okay, you can see the possibilities, the variations. If you hold up your watercolor when it's wet, it's gonna drip, and some people really love that about watercolor. Actually, they love the drip, so there one goes right there. Some people like to put little drops in, get super creative, have fun. You can kind of like get your brush heavy with water, and then it'll drop that color down, and just see what happens as you, and you can even, like, you know, use just gravity to pull color around too. I don't know if I love that, the purple. If you don't love a color that you get, you can use paper towel and just pick up that color. And there may be some remnants of it left, but you can take a brush that just has water on it even, or you can add some paint to it and just go over it. And if you brush a little harder, not so hard that your paper will tear, But if you brush just a little harder, it usually will sort of move that color around if you really don't like something that you put down. So I think I'm going to end our time together at this point. Feel free to go back and add details with your permanent marker when you're done if you'd like. Wait till the watercolor is dry, of course. And I think those of you with bags should have multiple pieces of paper to give it another try if you'd like. We usually learn through trial and error what works best. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing part of your Saturday morning with me. I wish you all the best and happy creating. Thank you.